Corporal James Harrison had been standing guard at the east gate of Windsor Castle for 3 hours when the unusual morning began to unfold. At 26 years old, James had served as a Royal Guard for 4 years. His sharp instincts had been honed through 2 deployments in Afghanistan before joining the ceremonial unit. The morning shift was typically quiet, with only occasional tourists and official visitors passing through his checkpoint. The September air carried a crisp hint of autumn as families began their weekend visits to the castle grounds. James maintained his stoic composure while his trained eyes continuously scanned the area, noting every person, vehicle, and potential security concern that entered his field of vision. His military training had taught him that threats often came from unexpected sources, and that vigilance was the price of safety. Around 10:30 in the morning, James noticed a small girl walking alone near the castle's outer perimeter. She appeared to be about 7 years old, the curly blonde hair and wearing a bright pink dress that made her easily visible among the crowd of tourists. What concerned James was that she seemed to be wandering without any adult supervision, moving further away from the main tourist areas toward a less monitored section of the grounds. The girl's behavior caught his attention, because children her age rarely wandered alone in such environments. James had younger siblings and understood how easily children could become separated from their families. But something about this particular situation felt different. The child wasn't crying or showing signs of distress that would typically accompany a lost child. Instead, moving with apparent purpose toward an area where tourists were discouraged from venturing. From his position, James could see a white van parked in a service area that was normally restricted to authorized personnel. The vehicle had been there for about 20 minutes, which was unusual because maintenance and delivery vehicles typically didn't linger in that location. The van appeared to be newer model with tinted windows, and James noticed that no official markings or permits were visible from his vantage point. His concern deepened when he observed that the little girl seemed to be walking directly toward the suspicious van. Every instinct developed through years of military and security training told him that the situation required immediate attention. Children didn't accidentally wander toward restricted areas, and unidentified vehicles in secure zones represented potential security threats that couldn't be ignored. James activated his radio to alert his supervisor about the developing situation. "Control, this is Eastgate. I have a possible security concern involving an unaccompanied minor and an unauthorized vehicle in Service Area 3, requesting permission to investigate." The response came immediately from Sergeant Major Collins, whose voice carried the authority of 15 years protecting the royal family. "Eastgate, permission granted. Maintain radio contact and request backup if needed. We're monitoring your position." James stepped away from his ceremonial post, knowing that his supervisor would coordinate coverage while he addressed the potential security threat. His movement was purposeful, but controlled, designed to reach the child without causing alarm among the tourists or alerting anyone who might be observing the situation. As he walked toward the service area, James kept the little girl in sight while also monitoring the white van for any signs of movement or suspicious activity. His hand instinctively moved closer to his sidearm, a precautionary measure that his training had made automatic when approaching potentially dangerous situations. The child had stopped about 10 feet from the van, and James could see that someone inside the vehicle was gesturing for her to come closer. The sight sent immediate alarm through his security training, as adults attempting to lure children into vehicles represented one of the most serious threats that security personnel were trained to recognize and prevent. "Excuse me, sweetheart," James called out in a gentle voice, designed to avoid frightening the child while also alerting anyone in the van that her interaction was being observed. "Are you looking for your parents? I can help you find them." The little girl turned toward James with an expression that surprised him, instead of the confusion or fear he expected to see in a lost child. Her face showed a mixture of nervousness and something that looked almost like guilt. Her response would prove to be far more complex than a simple case of a child separated from her. "Family, I'm supposed to meet my uncle," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of tourist activity. "He said he has something special to show me." James felt his protective instincts intensify immediately. The phrase about meeting an unknown adult who promised something special, raised every red flag in his training about child safety and potential abduction scenarios. His approach became more focused as he realized he might be preventing a serious crime in progress. "What's your uncle's name, sweetheart?" James asked, moving slightly closer while keeping himself positioned between the child and the van. "And where are your parents right now?" The child's hesitation and inability to provide clear answers about her supposed uncle or family situation confirmed James's growing suspicions that something was seriously wrong. His years of security training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was now screaming that this situation represented a significant threat to the child's safety. The van's engine started suddenly, and James could see movement inside the vehicle that suggested someone was preparing to either leave quickly or take some other action. The combination of an unaccompanied child, an unauthorized vehicle, and suspicious adult behavior created a scenario that demanded immediate intervention to protect both the child and the general public. James reached for his radio to request immediate backup while positioning himself protectively in front of the little girl. What he would discover in the next few minutes would test every aspect of his training and reveal a situation far more dangerous and complex than a simple case of stranger danger. The morning that had begun with routine security duties was about to transform into a confrontation that would demonstrate why the Royal Guard's training extended far beyond ceremonial functions, to include real-world threat assessment and protection of innocent civilians. James keyed his radio while keeping his eyes fixed on the white van. His occupant seemed to be growing impatient with the delay caused by his intervention. "Control, this is Eastgate. I have a code yellow situation involving possible child endangerment. Need immediate backup at Service Area 3. The urgency in his voice. "Backup units en route, ETA to minutes. Maintain safe distance and do not engage unless imminent threat to civilian safety." The little girl looked up at James with wide eyes that seemed to hold secrets far beyond her apparent age. "My uncle said the police might try to stop us," she whispered, her voice carrying a tremor that could have been fear or something else entirely. "He said they wouldn't understand about the special surprise." The comment sent ice through James's veins. Adults who warn children about police intervention were almost certainly involved in illegal activities. His protective instincts shifted into high gear as he gently placed himself more firmly between the child and the "Sweetheart, what's your real name?" James asked softly, crouching down to her eye level while maintaining awareness of his surroundings. "And can you tell me where you live?" "Emma," she replied, but her hesitation suggested even this basic information might not be reliable. "I live with my grandmother, but she's sick and can't take care of me anymore. My uncle said he would help." The story raised additional red flags for James. Predators often targeted vulnerable children with family problems, offering help and support to gain trust before exploiting them. His training in recognizing trafficking and abduction patterns was lighting up warning signals about every aspect of this interaction. The van's side door suddenly slid open, and James caught his first clear glimpse of the interior. What he saw made his blood run cold and his hand move instinctively toward his weapon. The back of the van had been modified with restraints, blankets, and equipment that clearly wasn't designed for legitimate transportation purposes. A man in his 40s emerged from the driver's seat, his appearance disheveled and his movements carrying the nervous energy of someone whose plans were being disrupted. He was thin with graying hair and wore clothes that looked like they had been slept in, presenting the kind of unkempt appearance that suggested someone living on the margins of society. "Emma, come here now," the man called out with false cheerfulness that didn't mask the edge of panic in his voice. "We need to go meet your new friends like we discussed." James stood immediately, his full military bearing now evident as he positioned himself protectively in front of Emma. His training kicked in as he assessed the threat level and potential courses of action. The man was approximately 50 feet away, close enough to be dangerous, but far enough that James had time to react to any aggressive moves. "Sir, I need to see some identification and documentation showing your relationship to this child." James called out with the authoritative voice he had developed. Through years of security work, the man's response confirmed James's worst suspicions. Instead of producing identification or explaining his legitimate connection to Emma, he began moving closer while reaching into his jacket pocket in a way that suggested he might be armed. "This is none of your business." "Soldier boy," the man snarled, his false cheerfulness evaporating to reveal underlying aggression. "Emma came here willingly, and we have places to go." James's radio crackled with updates from his backup units. "Eastgate units are 30 seconds out. Describe your current tactical situation." "One adult male, potentially armed, attempting to remove unaccompanied minor in modified vehicle." James responded quickly while keeping his attention focused on the approaching threat. "Child appears to be potential trafficking victim. Emma." Grabbed James's leg with small hands that trembled with genuine fear. Whatever story she had been told about meeting her uncle and receiving special surprises, the reality of the situation was clearly frightening her now that she was witnessing adult. "Confrontation, please don't let him take me," she whispered, her earlier compliance replaced by the natural fear response of a child recognizing danger. The man heard her plea, and his demeanor shifted from nervous to openly aggressive. "Emma, get over here right now, or you'll be in serious trouble." "Remember what we talked about?" The threatening tone toward the child eliminated any remaining doubt in James's mind about the man's intentions. His military training and protective instincts merged into a focused determination to prevent harm to an innocent child. Regardless of the personal risk involved, James activated his radio again while drawing his sidearm in a defensive position. "Control. Suspect is making threatening moves toward child victim. I am drawing my weapon in protection of civilian life." The backup units arrived at that moment, the 2 armed guards taking flanking positions while a third began evacuating tourists from the immediate area. The sound of additional personnel arriving seemed to panic the man, whose options for escaping with Emma were rapidly diminishing. But instead of surrendering or fleeing alone, the man made a choice that would escalate the situation dramatically. He pulled what appeared to be a weapon from his jacket and began moving more aggressively toward James and Emma. "Nobody needs to get hurt here," the man called out, though his actions contradicted his words. "Just let me take the girl and everyone can go home safely." James felt Emma pressing closer against his legs, her small body trembling with fear as she realized that the man she had trusted was now threatening, the person trying to protect her. The situation was rapidly developing into exactly the kind of scenario that Royal Guard training prepared them for. Confrontations where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death. The backup guards had established a perimeter around the area, but the man's position near the van and his apparent weapon created a complex tactical situation. James had to balance protecting Emma with neutralizing the threat while ensuring that innocent bystanders weren't caught in crossfire. "Sir, drop your weapon and step away from the vehicle," James commanded with the authority of someone trained to handle life-threatening situations. "This area is secure, and you have nowhere to go." The man's response would determine whether this confrontation could be resolved peacefully or would escalate into the kind of violent encounter that James's training had prepared him for, but hoped never to experience while protecting civilians on British soil. The man's weapon turned out to be a large knife, she brandished with the desperate movements of someone whose carefully planned crime was unraveling. James's training immediately classified this as a deadly force situation, as blade weapons at close range could be as dangerous as firearms. Especially with a child in the immediate vicinity. "Emma belongs with me," the man shouted, his voice cracking with stress and desperation. "I've been planning this for months." "She wants to come, don't you, Emma?" Emma's response shattered any pretense about willing participation. "No," she cried, clinging tighter to James's leg. "I don't want to go." He said bad things would happen if I didn't listen. The admission confirmed James's assessment that this was an abduction attempt, involving a child who had been coerced rather than genuinely willing to go with her supposed uncle. His protective stance became more pronounced as he ensured Emma remained behind him while he maintained visual contact with the armed suspect. "Sergeant Major," Collins's voice came through the radio with tactical updates. Eastgate Armed Response Team is en route. Local police have been notified. Maintain defensive position and protect the civilian. The backup guards had established a secure perimeter. But the suspect's erratic behavior and proximity to James and Emma created a delicate tactical situation. Any aggressive move by the security forces could provoke violence that might endanger the child they were trying to protect. James noticed something that changed his understanding of the situation dramatically. As the man gestured with the knife, his sleeve pulled back to reveal track marks on his forearms, suggesting drug addiction that would make his behavior even more unpredictable. Additionally, James caught sight of electronic equipment in the van that looked like recording devices. Control. Suspect appears to be under influence of narcotics and van contains recording equipment. This may be more than simple abduction, James reported while maintaining his defensive position. The man overheard the radio transmission and became even more agitated. "You don't understand anything?" he screamed. "This is bigger than just one little girl. There are people who pay good money for special videos." The horrifying implication hit James like a physical blow. This wasn't just attempted kidnapping. It was part of what appeared to be a child exploitation network. The modified van, recording equipment. The man's desperate behavior suddenly made terrible sense within that context. Emma seemed to understand enough of what was happening to be genuinely terrified now. "He showed me pictures on his phone," she whispered to James. "Bad pictures of other children. He said I had to do the same things, or something worse would happen to my grandmother." The revelation that Emma's grandmother was being used as leverage to coerce the child's cooperation added another layer of urgency to the situation. James realized they were dealing with sophisticated criminal organization rather than a lone predator, which meant there could be additional threats that hadn't yet been identified. "Emma, is your grandmother really sick?" James asked quietly while keeping his weapon trained on the suspect. "She's in the hospital," Emma replied through tears. "He said he was a doctor who could help her get better. But first I had to help him with some special pictures for other sick children." The manipulation was sickeningly professional, targeting a vulnerable child through her love for her grandmother and her desire to help other children. James felt anger building alongside his protective instincts. But his training kept him focused on safely resolving the immediate threat. The armed suspect was becoming increasingly erratic, waving the knife while shouting about people who wouldn't understand and money that was owed to him. His behavior suggested someone whose criminal enterprise was collapsing and who might be desperate enough to attempt violence as a final solution, sir. "We know about your operation," James called out, hoping to gather more information while keeping the man talking rather than acting. "Put down the knife, and we can discuss this situation calmly." The man's laugh was bitter and desperate. "You don't know anything. This goes way beyond one van and one kid. There are hundreds of children, thousands of customers, millions of dollars involved. You think stopping me here changes anything?" The boast about the scope of the criminal network confirmed James's fears about facing something much larger than a single predator, but his immediate concern remained protecting Emma and neutralizing the armed threat in front of them. The backup guards were positioned to provide crossfire if needed, but the suspect's proximity to James and Emma made any aggressive action extremely risky. The tactical situation required patience and precision to avoid endangering the very person they were trying to protect. "Emma," James said softly, without taking his eyes off the suspect, "I want you to very slowly move behind that concrete barrier over there. Can you do that for me?" Emma nodded, but seemed afraid to leave the protection of James's presence. Her hesitation was understandable given that she had been manipulated and threatened by adults who were supposed to protect her. The suspect noticed the movement and became more aggressive. "She stays right here. Emma, you know what happens if you don't listen to me." But Emma had apparently reached her limit of fear and compliance. Instead of obeying the man's command, she ran toward the concrete barrier James had indicated, her small legs carrying her away from immediate danger. The suspect's reaction was immediate and violent. Seeing his leverage disappearing, he charged toward James with the knife raised, his desperation overriding any rational assessment of the situation he was now facing. "James, had trained for exactly this scenario countless times during his military service and security training. The suspect was closing distance rapidly with a deadly weapon, and there were no longer any alternatives to using force to protect both himself and Emma. Time seemed to slow as James's training took over, his movements becoming automatic responses developed through years of preparation for life-threatening encounters. The next few seconds would determine whether this attempted child exploitation would end in tragedy or justice. James's military training kicked in with automatic precision as the knife-wielding suspect charged toward him. In one fluid movement, he sidestepped the attacker's desperate lunge while delivering a controlled strike that neutralized the threat without using lethal force. The suspect hit the ground hard, his weapon skittering across the pavement as backup guards immediately moved in to secure him. Suspect down and secured. James reported into his radio while immediately turning to check on Emma's safety. The little girl was huddled behind the concrete barrier, tears streaming down her face but physically unharmed. Sergeant Major Collins arrived on scene within seconds, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation while coordinating with the arriving police units. "Outstanding work, Corporal Harrison. Emergency services are en route for the suspect, and we need to secure that van immediately." The suspect was conscious but dazed, alternating between cursing and making disjointed threats about people who would be angry about his capture. His erratic behavior and rambling statements suggested drug withdrawal was beginning to affect his mental state, making his earlier desperation even more understandable. "There are others," the man mumbled as paramedics arrived to assess his injuries. "This operation has sponsors, customers, protection. You have no idea what you've stumbled into." Detective Inspector Sarah Matthews from the local police had arrived to take charge of what was clearly a complex criminal investigation. Her specialized unit dealt with crimes against children, and she immediately recognized the significance of what James had prevented. Corporal Harrison, "Your quick thinking may have saved not just Emma, but potentially dozens of other children," she said as her team began processing the crime scene. "We've been tracking this network for months without a breakthrough." The van's interior revealed the full horror of what Emma had been saved from. Professional quality cameras, lighting equipment, and restraints painted a picture of systematic child exploitation that made everyone involved in the investigation feel sick. Additionally, laptops and storage devices suggested extensive documentation of previous crimes. Emma was gently questioned by specially trained officers, while victim advocates ensured her emotional well-being was protected throughout the process. Her story revealed the sophisticated manipulation tactics used by the criminal network to target vulnerable children through their family members. "He knew about my grandmother being in the hospital," Emma told the investigators through tears. "He showed me official-looking papers that said he could get her the best treatment, but only if I helped him first. He said the pictures were for a medical study about helping sick children." The level of preparation and research that had gone into targeting Emma specifically suggested a well-funded organization with access to personal information that should have been private. Detective Matthews realized they were dealing with something much larger than a local predator. James remained with Emma throughout the initial questioning, his presence providing the stability and protection that helped her feel safe enough to share the details of her ordeal. His training in working with trauma victims proved as valuable as his security skills in ensuring Emma's cooperation with the investigation. "The man showed me photos on his phone of other children," Emma continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said they were helping doctors learn how to treat sick kids. But the pictures looked scary and wrong. The revelation that photographic evidence of other victims might exist on the suspect's devices sparked immediate action from the digital forensics team. Recovering that evidence could lead to identifying and rescuing other children who were being exploited by the network. As the investigation expanded, it became clear that James's intervention had disrupted something much more significant than a single attempted abduction. The suspect's phone contained contacts and communications that suggested connections to an international network of child exploitation. "Emma," Detective Matthews asked gently, "did the man ever mention other places or people involved in this medical research?" Emma nodded slowly. He talked about facilities where children could stay while helping with the research. He said some kids got to travel to different countries to help doctors there too. The international dimension of the network explained the sophisticated preparation and resources that had been invested in targeting Emma. This wasn't opportunistic crime, but systematic exploitation that required coordination across multiple jurisdictions. James felt both relief at preventing Emma's victimization and anger at discovering the scope of what she had been saved from. His military experience in combat zones had exposed him to various forms of human evil, but crimes against children struck him with particular force. The suspect regained consciousness as he was being loaded into the ambulance, his eyes focusing on James with hatred and fear. "You have no idea what you've done," he whispered hoarsely. "They'll find other children. This changes nothing." Detective Matthews heard the threat and immediately arranged for enhanced security around Emma and her grandmother. If the network was as extensive as evidence suggested, there could be retaliation attempts against witnesses who could damage their operations. "Corporal Harrison," she said as the ambulance departed with the suspect, "your testimony will be crucial to prosecuting this case successfully. But more importantly, your actions today likely prevented Emma from disappearing into a nightmare that destroys children's lives permanently." James nodded grimly, understanding that his intervention represented just one victory against a much larger problem. The recording equipment and sophisticated preparation suggested that other children hadn't been as fortunate as Emma. As the immediate crisis passed and evidence collection continued, James reflected on how routine security duties had suddenly confronted him with one of society's most horrible crimes. His training had prepared him for physical threats, but the emotional impact of seeing how predators targeted innocent children was something no amount of preparation could fully address. Emma's grandmother was contacted at the hospital, where she had been genuinely receiving treatment for a serious illness. The criminals had researched her medical situation to create believable cover stories, demonstrating the thoroughness of their targeting process. "Thank you for saving my granddaughter," the elderly woman told James during a phone call from her hospital bed. "Emma's everything to me. I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't been there." The gratitude was meaningful. But James knew that the real work was just beginning. Breaking up the criminal network would require months of investigation, and ensuring Emma's safety and recovery would be an ongoing process. 3 weeks after the incident, the investigation had exploded into an international operation involving law enforcement agencies across 5 countries. The digital evidence recovered from the suspect's devices had revealed a sophisticated network that had been operating for years, exploiting hundreds of children while generating millions of dollars in illegal profits. James found himself at the center of what media outlets were calling Operation Guardian Angel, the coordinated effort to dismantle what investigators described as one of the largest child exploitation networks ever discovered. His testimony had become crucial not just for prosecuting the man he had stopped, but for understanding how the entire operation functioned. Detective Inspector Matthews briefed James on the broader implications of his intervention. "The suspect you apprehended, whose real name is Michael Brennan, was just one recruiter in a network that spans from Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia. Your actions didn't just save Emma. They gave us the breakthrough we needed to roll up the entire operation." The investigation had revealed that Brennan was part of a systematic recruitment operation that targeted vulnerable children through their families' medical or financial crises. Social workers, hospital employees, and even some law enforcement personnel had been corrupted to provide information about potential victims. Emma had been selected because her grandmother's medical condition created both emotional leverage and financial pressure that made the family susceptible to offers of help. The criminals had researched her situation for months before making contact, demonstrating patience and resources that suggested professional-level organization. "We've identified over 200 victims so far," Matthews continued, ranging in age from 5 to 15. "Some were transported internationally before we could locate them. But your intervention gave us the timing we needed to prevent many more abductions." James felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what his routine security patrol had uncovered. The idea that his simple decision to investigate an unaccompanied child had potentially saved hundreds of other children from similar fates was difficult to process emotionally. Emma had been receiving counseling and support services while staying in protective custody until the full scope of threats against her could be assessed. The criminal's extensive resources and international connections meant that witness protection protocols were necessary to ensure her safety. "How is Emma handling everything?" James asked. "Having been prevented from seeing her due to security concerns and ongoing legal proceedings, she's resilient," Matthews replied with admiration. "Her testimony has been incredibly valuable, and she specifically asked about you multiple times. She understands that you saved her from something terrible." The arrests that followed the initial breakthrough had been swift and coordinated across multiple time zones. Safe houses had been raided, financial networks disrupted, and key personnel taken into custody before they could flee or destroy evidence. However, the investigation had also revealed disturbing information about the scope and sophistication of modern child exploitation networks. The criminals used encrypted communications, cryptocurrency payments, and legitimate business fronts to hide their activities from law enforcement. The technology they employed was more advanced than what many legitimate businesses use, explained Detective Superintendent Robert Clark, who was coordinating the international response. They had cybersecurity specialists, money laundering experts, and even corrupt officials providing protection. James attended multiple briefings about the network's operations. His role as the initial responder, making him valuable for understanding how the criminals operated at street level. His military background helped him grasp the tactical and logistical complexity of what they were fighting against. The suspect, Michael Brennan, had been charged with multiple felonies, including attempted kidnapping, child endangerment, and participation in organized criminal activity. His cooperation with investigators was limited, but the physical evidence recovered from his operation provided extensive leads for pursuing other network members. Brennan keeps insisting that stopping him won't matter because there are dozens of others doing the same work, Matthews informed James during one of their meetings. Unfortunately, he's probably right about the scale of the problem, but wrong about the impact of disrupting their operations. The international arrests had netted over 50 suspects across multiple countries, with more investigations ongoing as authorities followed financial and communication trails. The network's customers had included wealthy individuals, organized crime figures, and even some people in positions of public trust. Emma's grandmother had recovered enough from her medical treatment to provide a stable home environment, but both she and Emma would require ongoing security support due to potential retaliation from network members who remained at large. The psychological support Emma is receiving has been remarkable, her court-appointed advocate told James during a legal briefing. "Children are incredibly resilient when they have proper support systems, and she's shown tremendous courage in helping with the investigation." James had been commended by multiple law enforcement agencies for his role in breaking up the network, but he remained focused on the ongoing work required to protect other potential victims. His experience had opened his eyes to threats he hadn't previously understood. The Royal Guard Command had used the incident to review and enhance their training programs, recognizing that security personnel often served as the first line of defense against various forms of criminal activity. James had been asked to help develop new protocols for recognizing and responding to child endangerment situations. Your instincts and training prevented a horrible crime and enabled justice for hundreds of victims, Colonel Richardson told James during his commendation ceremony. "This represents the best of what military service and public protection should accomplish." The media attention surrounding Operation Guardian Angel had raised public awareness about child exploitation networks and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. Educational campaigns had been launched to help people recognize warning signs of trafficking and recruitment activities. International cooperation had improved, significantly as a result of the investigation, with new protocols established for sharing intelligence about suspected child exploitation networks. The case had demonstrated both the global nature of the threat and the effectiveness of coordinated response efforts. As the immediate crisis phase of the investigation concluded, James reflected on how a single moment of alertness and action had created ripple effects that extended far beyond what he could have imagined. His decision to investigate an unaccompanied child had ultimately led to justice for hundreds of victims and disruption of a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for years. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, James stood in a courtroom watching Michael Brennan receive a life sentence for his crimes against children. The prosecution had presented overwhelming evidence of his role in the international exploitation network, with testimony from dozens of victims whose lives had been destroyed by his actions. Emma sat in the witness gallery beside her grandmother, both of them having provided crucial testimony that helped secure convictions against multiple network members. The 7-year-old girl who had nearly disappeared into a nightmare had become a symbol of resilience and hope for other survivors. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said during closing arguments, "the defendant's crimes represent some of the most heinous violations of human dignity imaginable. But this case also demonstrates how one person's vigilance and courage can save countless innocent lives." James felt humbled by the recognition, knowing that his actions had been simply following his training and instincts rather than any conscious heroism. The real heroes, in his view, were survivors like Emma, who had found the strength to testify and help bring their abusers to justice. The international investigation had ultimately rescued over 400 children from exploitation, dismantled criminal operations in 12 countries, and seized assets worth more than $50 million. The scope of the network had exceeded everyone's initial estimates. The coordinated response had been equally comprehensive. Detective Inspector Matthews approached James after the sentencing. "The ripple effects from your intervention continue to expand," she said with satisfaction. 3 more networks have been identified and disrupted using intelligence gathered from this investigation. Emma ran up to James as they left the courthouse, her grandmother close behind. The little girl looked healthy and confident, bearing little resemblance to the terrified child he had protected months earlier. "Mr. James," Emma said with the directness that characterized children, "my counselor says I should thank you for saving me, but I think you should thank me for letting you be a hero." The comment made everyone laugh, including James, who knelt down to Emma's level for their conversation. "You're absolutely right, Emma. Thank you for being brave enough to trust me when it really mattered." Emma's grandmother, Mrs. Dorothy Jenkins, had tears in her eyes as she watched the interaction. "James, you gave me back my granddaughter and prevented other families from experiencing our nightmare. There aren't words adequate for that kind of gratitude." The healing process had been challenging for both Emma and her grandmother, but specialized support services had helped them rebuild their sense of safety and normalcy. Emma was attending school regularly, participating in children's activities, and showing no signs of the trauma that had been prevented. James had been promoted to sergeant and assigned to a new position within the Royal Guard that focused on developing security protocols for protecting civilians in various threat scenarios. His experience with the child exploitation case had made him valuable for training other personnel in recognizing and responding to criminal activity. The training programs you've helped develop are being implemented across multiple law enforcement agencies. Colonel Richardson informed James during their quarterly review. "Your practical experience with complex criminal investigations has contributed to protecting countless potential victims." The international cooperation that had grown from Operation Guardian Angel had evolved into permanent collaborative structures for combating organized crime networks. Information sharing protocols had been streamlined, and joint training programs had been established to improve response capabilities. Michael Brennan's life sentence had been followed by similar convictions for 43 other network members. With additional prosecutions ongoing in multiple jurisdictions, the criminal organization that had seemed untouchable had been systematically dismantled through patient investigation and international coordination. Emma had become involved in educational programs designed to help other children recognize and report suspicious behavior. Her appropriate presentations to school groups had proven remarkably effective at teaching safety concepts without creating unnecessary fear. Children listen to other children in ways they don't always listen to adults, explained Dr. Patricia Moore, who coordinated the educational programs. Emma's story helps them understand that trusting their instincts and seeking help from trusted adults can literally save lives. The financial investigation had revealed the staggering profits generated by child exploitation networks, information that had led to new legislation and enhanced penalties for such crimes. The recovered assets were being used to fund victim support services and prevention programs worldwide. James had testified before parliamentary committees about the need for improved training for security personnel in recognizing various forms of criminal activity. His recommendations had been incorporated into national security protocols, extending the impact of his intervention far beyond the original incident. The most important lesson from this case, James told a gathering of international security professionals, is that criminals count on ordinary people not paying attention or not wanting to get involved. Vigilance and willingness to act when something seems wrong can literally save lives. Emma's story had been featured in educational materials used by schools and community organizations to teach children about personal safety without traumatizing them. Her resilience and recovery had provided hope for other families dealing with similar situations. The technology recovered from the criminal network had led to improvements in digital forensics capabilities and enhanced methods for tracking online criminal activity. Law enforcement agencies had developed new tools for identifying and rescuing victims of exploitation. The intelligence gathered from this operation continues to generate leads and prevent crimes. Detective Superintendent Clark reported during a conference on organized crime, "We're still following connections that originated from Corporal Harrison's initial intervention." James had maintained contact with Emma and her grandmother, watching as they rebuilt their lives with strength and determination that inspired everyone around them. Emma had started taking martial arts classes, saying she wanted to be able to protect other children like James had protected her. The psychological evaluation programs developed for survivors of exploitation had been expanded and improved based on lessons learned from Emma's recovery. Mental health professionals had gained valuable insights into helping children heal from trauma while maintaining their natural resilience. Emma's case became a model for how proper support systems can help children not just survive, but thrive after traumatic experiences, explained Dr. Sandra Williams, who had coordinated Emma's therapy. Her recovery has informed treatment protocols that will help thousands of other children. The international training programs that had grown from Operation Guardian Angel were now active in over 30 countries, sharing techniques for recognizing, investigating, and prosecuting child exploitation networks. James had participated in several of these programs, training law enforcement and security personnel worldwide. 2 years after the incident, James received notification that Emma had written him a letter as part of a school project about heroes in her community. The letter, written in careful 7-year-old handwriting, thanked him not just for saving her, but for helping her understand that there were always good people willing to protect children. "Dear Sergeant James," the letter read, "My teacher says I should write about someone who made a difference in my life. I picked you because you showed me that soldiers aren't just for wars, they're for protecting people like me. I want to be like you when I grow up and help keep children safe." The letter had been accompanied by a drawing of a soldier standing next to a little girl, both of them smiling under a bright sun. Emma had written "Heroes come in all sizes" across the top of the picture. James kept both the letter and drawing on his desk as reminders of why his work mattered and how a single moment of attention and action could create positive changes that lasted for years. The incident had taught him that heroism often came from simply doing one's job with care and dedication. The criminal network that had seemed so powerful and untouchable had been destroyed by the combined efforts of dedicated professionals working together across international boundaries. Emma's nightmare had become the catalyst for protecting hundreds of other children and preventing countless future crimes. As James reflected on the journey that had begun with a routine security patrol, he understood that the most important victories often started with ordinary people choosing to pay attention, to care, and to act when they witnessed something wrong. His decision to investigate one unaccompanied child had ultimately saved hundreds of others and created lasting improvements in how society protects its most vulnerable members. Emma had grown from a terrified victim into a confident advocate for child safety, her recovery serving as proof that with proper support, even the worst experiences could be overcome. Her strength and resilience continued to inspire everyone who worked to protect children from exploitation and abuse. The case had demonstrated that evil, no matter how well organized and well funded, could be defeated by good people willing to stand up for what was right. James's moment of vigilance had triggered a chain reaction of justice that would continue, protecting children for years to come, proving that sometimes the smallest actions could have the most profound consequences.